Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. So today I wanted to talk about reality and life and what is life. It's so interesting that when we grow up, we have these opinions of simple concepts like life. Well, it's just life. What's life? Well, it means you got a soul and you're awake. Well, what's alive and what's not alive? Well, that chair is not alive. You know, for a long time in my life, it was animals had no souls. They just were interesting little robots to entertain us. Then there was the vegetarian movement, where things with eyes were alive and things that had roots in the ground that actually grew out of the ground and bear fruit, they're not alive. We don't need to worry about them. They have no consciousness. They have no feelings. They have no pain. And then there's the bias of our own invention, right? We look in the mirror and we say, well, what are we? It takes one to know one, right? But the problem with it takes one to know one is that we develop biases, right? We're so sure of what we are. We're so sure what is. What's really interesting is that societies in the past have sort of differed widely about what is alive and what isn't alive. What is the stage of life that you and I live, and what's the stage that you live after your body dies? You know, the Egyptians thought you continued your life in the other realm. You know, you just simply got on a boat. You know, after Minas supposedly unified North and South, Anubis went from being an all-purpose god to a god with a very specific river Styx job to get you to the afterlife, right? The Egyptians offered food, and as the food decayed in the bowl, it is their assertion that life is coming to eat of the fruit, eat of the vegetables. It's not rotting, it's just that the life-bearing part of it has been taken from it. Some Native American tribes believed that the souls that had passed turned into the stars. We have a listener, David, who films the stars. If you ever want to see some incredible star filming, our locked Facebook page has an amazing gallery that he shares. It doesn't look anything like what they told us in astronomy. The distortions on the stars don't look anything like a refracting atmosphere. In fact, it doesn't even look like water. If you look at it for a couple seconds for the very first time, you're going to argue with me. But the second you fixate on it and look at it through his camera and realize that he's panning his camera around, he's moving it around. So any anomaly in the sensor inside the camera would travel with the bullseye that's inside the camera, but it doesn't. It's like three-dimensional structures coming off these things. Doesn't look like me, doesn't look like you. But it doesn't look like a star. So why have this conversation about what is life? It is merely to split it out like a guy's dropped a lot of acid and now he's talking about his backyard furniture moving? No. Here's my thread I want to pull with you in this episode. What if we extended greatly our definition of what life could be / is? How would that greatly change, or I shouldn't put a bias on it, how would it change our definition of where we are? Because we're all trying to figure it out, right? You know, 99.9% of the people, I think, just live life. They don't think about it. But we have fun on this show. We have some of you that are really studying the Matrix. And I love the fact that there's a team of you who are into that. You know, you're studying anomalies that might be more computer-based. I know computers inside and out. I can think all the way down to the silicon transistors that are gating electrons into zeros and ones, and I still do not see a clear copy of our reality being a computer, right? It can only be a computer on a very existential level of, I guess we could be zeros and ones in some memory bank, and 3D is merely a simulation of a Cartesian coordinate of zeros and ones, but it doesn't really blend well. But I'm glad that you guys researched that, because you guys might unlock it, right? There's some of you that stay with the heliocentric Earth that has Pangea drift. There's me, heliocentric Earth, expanding Earth. There's some of you that are flat Earth, disk, flat Earth, turned up disk, flat Earth, sort of semi-contact lens. And then there's other flavors. But now, what if we take a pause from all this geometry and geology and astronomy and simply say, well, you're thinking about Earth being a ball, you're thinking about Earth being a disk, but what if Earth was a living being? What if that was the case? Now, what does that do? We used to think the Earth lived on the back of a turtle. And why a turtle? You ever think that through for a split second? It was the old fable question. Someone like Copernicus or Galileo was talking to an audience. I can't remember. It was told in one of the Hawking books. One of you will remember it. Someone was asking one of the prestigious scientists of the universe, quote unquote, that he was wrong, that the Earth isn't round, it's on the back of a turtle. And he said, "Dear Miss, what is a turtle standing on, if that is the case?" And she said, "It's turtles all the way down." Turtles standing on turtles, standing on turtles. Interesting, right? I suppose it's because turtles were known for living hundreds of years, right? If a turtle outlives you, then it could be 1,000 years old, right? You never know. If it outlives 2 or 3 generations, because everyone's dying at 40 years old, but the turtle's going to go for 150, why, that turtle seems like a wise old man, doesn't it? What if everything was alive? Everything exuded or used or routed life force. I mean everything. One of the frustrating things about vegetarianism for me, and there's several different takes on vegetarianism, and some of them don't bother me at all. If you get cancer, you should be vegetarian immediately until you get completely in essentially remission and deemed as cured as you're going to be, right? Because cancer feeds on red meat. But I had a friend's daughter tell me, or didn't tell me personally, but just said it in the room, and I'd never heard it before, which is, I just can't eat anything with eyeballs. And right off the bat, it was very apparent that they were trying to get an accolade for being so empathetic to animals, which is fine. I love animals. I think they're cute as hell. But I also love plants. I am utterly surrounded right now by green, as I've said several times on the episode. There's nothing that brings me more calmness than being in this environment. Plants that I water, plants that I have manicured, plants that I manicure. I look at them and I feel a certain way, And some animals can do that for me. Some animals are too goddamn hyper. I love them too, but it's more like I'm looking for a big piece of candy in terms of emotion, right? But because I keep trying to parse that, because that one statement, I've mentioned it a couple times on the show, it bothered me. And it bothered me for 2 reasons. At face value, I knew it was a bunch of bullshit in my own brain. I just thought, that's a crock of shit. You can't eat things with fucking eyeballs. Give me a break, right? But then my retort to myself was, why do you think that's so much bullshit? And then I saw, laboratory experiments where they prove that plants have the full consciousness and capability of identifying specific human beings. They know when you're wearing a lab coat versus when you don't wear a lab coat. They know an individual just like we do. And they basically killed a plant in front of another plant in this German laboratory. It was all filmed. And they had an EKG on the one that survived, and it went bonkers, and it never calmed down after the death, after the murder. They had 2 different lab techs come in and clean up that plant. It went kind of crazy again, but not quite as intense. And then they let like a month go by where they had taken away the friend, and it never really calmed down the way it was prior to the murder. But it had gone down, like it was probably like 5% activity, and it had gone down to maybe 15% after about a month. But the person who did it, this heavier woman in a lab coat, hadn't come in contact with that plant. And they had this young couple come and take care of the first plant and treat it like gold. And it was nervous for a little while, just like a human being. And after about 45 days, the woman that tore the other plant apart walked in, and the fucking EKG floored. And your view is of the EKG in the viewing room, and then the 2-way mirror into the other plant. So you watched it with your own eyes. Plants are alive. They're conscious completely. Plants outlive us by hundreds and hundreds of years. So let's analyze this, because yesterday it finally dawned on me how to explain the insanity of that fucking cause. Life is held together in this particular reality by something that we call mathematics, at least for our physical state of being, right? Our 5-sense robot system that we call a vessel. Through that, I personally believe we have a life force that flows through us. Again, my old analogy that I created this season is a current of water in a river. It's right there in front of you. It's a little funnel. Someone is dumping some blue dye upstream. The blue dye comes down, goes through the funnel, and then keeps going. The vessel is the funnel. The soul is the blue dye. It flows through us. That's my take. That's my physical model for you. But if nothing else, geometry and mathematics holds together a pig, and it also holds together a tree. Now the pig, it's pink, makes little noises. It's small and it's cute when it's little. They're intelligent. They have little eyes. And they taste good when they fall on campfires. But let's just say someone wants to recognize a pig as a pet. I have a good friend of mine who has a pig pet. Loves it to death. Okay. How long is the pig going to live? I don't know how long pigs live personally. 20 years maybe. In the Midwest, I've got friends of mine that had pet pigs, and they eat them after they get to a certain age. And I've known families that use that as a method to teach their kids the cycle of life. Tears start to dry up once they smell bacon, let me tell you. But now, how long does a tree live? Right? How long does the geometry and the consciousness that is a tree live? Like I said in a recent episode, Joshua trees. I haven't sat around to verify that a Joshua tree is 4,500 years old, but I know that I grew up with them being told that there were plants that were alive back in 0 AD, 2,000-year-old trees. I don't know how long it takes a redwood to get this to be, the diameter of like 60 feet. They could drill a hole through it and drive a semi through it. I'm sure that takes a few hundred years. But even the youngest tree, every ring is a year, right? There's 150, 200-year-old trees in my hometown all over the place, right? So what's more alive? Something that's been alive for 10 years and dies, like a cat or a dog? Or a tree that has seen the Civil War, seen man's entire insanity for 150 years. We got no problem cutting down a tree and building a table, building a house. And there's hippies that do hug trees. I get it. I get why they do that. Now, for a long time, we weren't replanting trees, so we're destroying the place. Brazil just sold off their whole goddamn forest to China and then had the audacity to run some goddamn global warming thing during the Olympics. Wow. Look over here, right? Don't pay attention to our lack of morality. In the TV show Westworld, if you really pay attention, there's this question that keeps coming, especially with season 2, and this isn't going to ruin anything for you at all. But the hosts are starting to get to the point, and they did this well within season 1 and well within a couple episodes, where they're sort of analyzing the fact that it's like, you humans think you're real, and you think we're false. Why is that? Because you participated in mocking your own creation into us. You didn't create yourself. You don't know who did. But in copying your own geometry and your own sensibilities through artificial intelligence, this is all fictitious, of course, you were able to create us, but somehow you didn't imbue us with true life, the rights and sovereignty of being alive, when you cherish it so much and you die for it in your own world, right? When I wrote my version of Tron 3, there is a point when I have an artificial intelligence ask a human being, was I real? Am I real? Are you real? Was I good? You know? And the human, who's a genius, in the script, Kevin Flynn, in my script, you can see in his face he understands that he has had it wrong his whole life. That life is just as simple as life can be. It doesn't have to be utterly complex, does it? Do we debate the life of a single-cell being when we're in biology? No. It's alive, right? There's barely anything going on. You know, if you charge DARPA, hey, I want you to take the simplest single-cell bacteria that you can find in all of history, and I want you to simulate that in a computer, make a model, make a robot, whatever, they'd be done in half a day with all of the intelligence that that single-cell being has, because they have libraries already that they could plug in. But even if they had to start from scratch, month, maybe. And then is that thing that they created that mocks the bacteria not alive? Just because we were the creators all of a sudden? The grapefruit was invented in the 1800s by crossing a lemon and an orange. And I never knew that. I never knew that. Until like 2 or 3 years ago. I thought grapefruits were normal. But is a grapefruit not real because we participated in a hybrid situation? No. A Zinfandel wine, right? It's a grape that's been genetically engineered to handle stronger weather. Okay. So what is life? Is life only things that act like we do? Things that we can communicate with on some level? Things that are autonomous and can move and aren't rooted to the ground? And then there's the hair splitting, right? Oh, well, yeah, we don't debate that a tree is alive. That's absurd. But it doesn't talk to us and doesn't know language, so it's not really alive. It's like, how many conversations are you having with fucking dolphins, buddy? With their huge brains. We can teach gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans sign language. Monkey see, monkey do. That's much better, right? But just because your dog can't sit around and critique your choice in socks doesn't mean it's not alive, right? What if everything was alive? Your computer was alive. Your dishwasher's alive. And maybe it's just simply alive because it has been created by something. It has its own atomic structure, whatever that is, ethereal winds, currents, whatever. It is there. because you can pick it up. It has its own volume, right? The chair that my computer's on, that I'm staring at right now, well, it's on my cement porch. Well, because it's not connected to my porch, I'm going to draw a distinction between life of the porch and life of the chair. Isn't it interesting that people that hate machines typically have problems with machines? There's a whole Twilight Zone about it, which Stephen King used to create Maximum Overdrive and Christine. He mixed Christine with another one of the live broadcast ones. A car that was cursed to whoever bought it. But anyway, I've seen it 100 times. People who hate machines can never get into work. And when I come in the room, being very familiar with machines and not having any anxiety because I look into them and I can see them all the way through, they seem to like me. Okay, I know it sounds weird, but I usually get something to work. Fear and anxiety don't help. It could be law of attraction. Could be one of sabotaging the machine with your own projected reality, right? The other thing I've been thinking about lately in this realm is the movie The Shining / the book The Shining. There's a conversation in the kitchen in that movie between Scatman Crothers and the kid. Mr. Halloran is his character. And he's explaining The Shining to the kid because the kid shines, right? It's a multi-dimensional power. One of the powers is that they can talk without ever opening their mouths. But then he says something really, really amazing that I am going to tell you that there is some reality to it. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. One that's very scientific that we've sociologically developed over the years in the 50s especially, when we started putting people inside skyscrapers and treating them, like sardines in a can, right? But he says this line, he goes, it's like when someone burns toast, it leaves something behind. And when you walk in the room, you can smell the burned toast, even though you can't see it. It's not really on you or anything. Toast is in the trash. Long gone. Could be long gone with the garbage truck, but when you burn toast, it leaves that smell behind, doesn't it? And he said, the Overlook Hotel sort of shines. And it can give you images of things that happened a long time ago. And during the finale of the movie, Shelley Duvall's character is going through the memories of the hotel. It's really freaky and really weird. All these eyes wide shut things going on. I mean, Christ, that film was made, I think, in 76 or something like that. 77, something like that. And he was on it. Something like that. Maybe it was late as 79, I can't remember. But now there's something called the Hawthorne effect. I believe that's his name. I was taught this as a young kid. I was taught all this cool crap when I was a kid. I don't even know where it came from. But the Hawthorne effect is the idea that when you put a bunch of people in an office and you make them sit in a certain way, and it was going on in the 1800s where they had slave shops, even accounting offices where everyone's just sitting down staring and the desks are all in a line like a classroom. They found out that over time, the employees' efficiency would go down, their morality would go down, their happiness, right? And on some probably serendipitous occasion, the office changed the configuration of the desks. And all of a sudden, the morale went up and the productivity went up. But nothing else changed but the arrangement of the desks. And they later wrote papers about it and did these psychological studies, and they came up with this sort of, it was sort of a loose definition, I would say loosely based on reality definition. But a lot of the employees said, well, the second they moved our desks, we felt like the employer cared about us. Maybe that's part of it. I'm sure it's a multidimensional effect no matter what we think it's true or not, right? Until the other day, and I have noticed this several times, but I never really noticed it, I had to make room in my office for some new equipment that I got. I need a soldering station. I need a safe place for something to get really hot. All this voltage meter, all my supplies, and all this other good stuff. And so I had to move around my desk. And I just ended up moving it a little bit. I'm talking like diagonally 2 feet, maybe. And I swung around a bookcase and put it on the left side. I barely changed anything. But I'll be damned if when I walked in my office, it felt like a new room. It felt amazing, like really positive. And I don't even think it was really had to do with the new items I had in the room, because that wasn't my focus. It was just this ambient feeling of the room. Now, am I sitting here thinking, gosh, the employer must really care for me? No, it's my house. I'm doing it myself. I noticed that everything I was doing in my office all of a sudden became more productive. Just being in my office all day had less of that boredom attached to it. I was excited about it. Still am. I enjoy it. Well, then I started thinking about these episodes I've been making about ethereal winds, because what I'm doing now every single day of my life, every second of my life, is I'm looking around the world and envisioning the currents of atomic wind, they're called ether, forming everything that I can see. Both what I would define as living mass and supposedly not living mass. And when I looked at my office and I thought, man, I barely moved anything. Cosmetically speaking, it looks almost identical to the way it was before. I took out an old desk that fell apart, made it a little bit more spacious. But the part that's getting me off is when I'm staring at the desk that I simply moved a couple feet. It wasn't even 2 feet. I can't even see the desk behind me being gone. I'm having this amazing feeling. And I thought maybe it relates to a little bit of this notion of the shine, that the atomic winds of our existence have not only the assertive winds that make us up, hold us together, hold the desk in its form, this camera in its form, but perhaps there is a weaker stability that we cannot see that holds our experiences, echoes, the burned toast smell, right? In that particular region. And by moving the desk 2 feet, I no longer sit in the same place where I had been sitting for, 3 years. By sitting 2 feet over, it's different. It feels different. Have you ever swapped sides with your spouse in bed? All of a sudden it feels like you're in a new world. They feel new on their 3 feet over. You feel new on your 3 feet over. I can definitely say it's happened to me. It's almost like an ethereal indentation of current. You know, when I give my analogy of the river, I'm talking about a very specific, for all intents and purposes, violent structure, high construct called a current. The rest of the water in this river is just flowing from the high point to the low point. Look at Lake Havasu or your local pond. It could just sit there. It doesn't exactly sit there, but it's, for the most part, it's just there. Life gets to form in a particular way in a stagnant pool of water, roughly, than life that forms in a flowing stream of water. Because it's hard to have a home when you're constantly being moved. So you need to be life that can be on the move. The ecosystem of demands of nourishment has to be satiated by the entire thing. The entire Mississippi River would have to provide. And sure, there's rooted life in the bottom. The fish have to work hard to stay in the same place on a river. But in a pond, man, they can make a little home somewhere on the bottom and stay there. Much different, right? Human beings have been anthropomorphizing inanimate objects for years. The movie Christine, like I just mentioned, was actually a fictional movie based on the book by Stephen King, based on a couple Twilight Zones, where a boy named Arnie fell in love with his 1958 Plymouth Fury, which was one overlooked badass car, right? The 57 Chevy, when I grew up, was the car you always thought about when you thought about 50s cars. That and the 59 Caddy. Once I saw the Plymouth Fury, I was like, geez, why did the 57 Chevy ever make it to the top of that list? But he falls in love with this car. And the fun thing about the movie is that the car is alive. For whatever reason, it gained a soul. And it was probably given it to it by a really dark force in the universe based on what it does. We sat in the audience watching that because a lot of guys had given their cars names. I have objects in my house that feel like they have life in them. Isn't that weird? My washer and dryer. It feels like a husband and wife. For whatever reason in my mind, the washer seems like the man and the dryer seems like the woman. Right? He's doing all the kind of cranky, cold, wet work, and she's like the womb who warms it all up and dries it all out. She's that last step that goes, oh. It's interesting as human beings when we treat a certain inanimate object with respect, meaning we're delicate with it. We put it down carefully. We keep it clean. We don't loan it out to anybody. It starts to develop this sort of minor classification of a living being inside of our minds. It'll never talk to you. If it does, go see a doctor. We struggle as human beings with feeling inadequate. And I think that might just be short-sighted. There's this sort of silent battle between the flat earthers and the heliocentric folks, and that the flat earthers say, well, scientists and the global elite and those lying to us like NASA are simply trying to make us all feel inadequate, infinitely small in the universe, right? And their theory is to say, well, we're in a firmament dome of some sort, and God is right there. God is with us, and therefore we are not insignificant. I am living proof that you can believe it's round and still feel the exact same beauty as the firmament dome. I haven't been in space. I don't know what shape it is. But if everything shared a life force, and like my office and every office that's ever been rearranged, or a bedroom that was rearranged, or a front room that's rearranged, or when you remodel your house and you knock out a wall and you move the kitchen there and the pantry's no longer this and that, and you feel bright and new and renewed. Any past that you had, it seems like it's not there anymore. Maybe you were a young couple and you really fought for the first 10 years, and then you rearrange your house when you kind of calm down, and it just seems like it doesn't even look like that old place that used to have those disagreements, and you feel better, right? Some people leave homes because they're like, man, we just can't live in that house. That's got too much bad blood in it. Remember that? Right? It is interesting that we define a female, a life giver, with all these attributes of giving life, of incubating up life, holding it in her bosom for, not her bosom, but I guess her belly, for 9 months, right? There's a distinction and an honor that we give females. But as far as I know, only the Native Americans have ever asserted for a split second that Earth itself was alive. I'm not even aware of an Egyptian theory of that. Anut was the stars painted on her belly. But the Native Americans kind of figured it out. That's kind of cool. But she does give us life. Doesn't matter who designed this universe and who keeps it together. They chose, through design, by design, for us to gain all of our faculties from the earth, right? But we don't refer to the earth as anything other than an inanimate ball. But let's think about the soul for 1 second. Relatively speaking, even though there are giant shacks in the universe that are very tall, and Andre the Giants that have skulls the size of huge pumpkins, right? God bless that man. If we are made up of a life force that is our soul, it doesn't have to be that big to give us full life. For the scientists that believe that the brain equals our consciousness, they have a hard time when people get huge brain injuries and they're fine. You know, there's a medical condition where they remove half of your brain, the half top of your brain, like one left or right hemisphere, and the other half has to learn the other half and all this other stuff. Again, one of my grandmother's students came back to her. He was a Top Gun pilot at the time. He was suffering from major headaches. And he told my grandmother, he says, they did tests on me. They scanned my brain. And they found out that it's really small inside my head, that I actually have almost the equal amount of fluid in my brain that I do brain matter. He had a miniature brain. He goes, but I'm top of my class. I'm a Top Gun pilot. But these headaches got so bad I had to be decommissioned. Kid was in his mid-30s or something. He came to visit my grandmother because he wasn't sure how much life he had left. I don't know what happened to this guy. Believe me, it's not something I could make up. But he had full consciousness. Or is that kid that got shot by the shotgun, the gangbanger, he lost the whole frontal lobes. They're gone. Well, according to science, frontal lobes are where we gain all of our true discernment, our true human qualities, right? Lobotomies try to destroy the frontal lobes, and that's what makes you Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? But now, what would be the case if you had a disproportionately gigantic being? Now, whales are huge, but from what I understand, a lot of these beings, the bigger the being, the smaller the brain sometimes. Sometimes they have brains the size of walnuts, Again, a giant squid, 50 feet long, has a brain that's a tube that you could slide on your pinky if you were maybe a 6-foot man. Just an average pinky. This pinky on my finger is about the size of a giant squid brain. Squids are brilliant. They don't live that long. I think they live less than a year. It's weird. Will the Earth need a big brain? What is the Earth if it has a plasma core? What does it really look like in relation to other things? As it is above, so too it is below, right? It's a spherical object. Let's just go with that for a split second. It's got this sort of electric core. Who knows what's actually at the supercenter? If it's a spinning electric core, which would make sense with the poles that we have, then it's this tube. It's like this tornado of plasma going down the center. I don't know. Kind of feels like a human cell a little bit. But even human cells, they have a nucleus, which has chromosomes, which are made of protein patterns, which then have double helix arrays of nucleic acids. It's interesting how everything turns into sort of a stringy substance. Protein patterns are strings of protein. According to Stanford, they fold faster than the speed of light. Of course, according to Einstein, that's impossible. DNA, well, it's a big, long antenna of connected molecules that are much bigger than the protein molecules, I believe. Stars. I think it's interesting that we believe that science has figured out a way to truly triangulate the distance of stars using redshifts, to figure out what they're composed of, redshifts to figure out how big they are. Seems a little silly, doesn't it? But we buy it. How would we change our behavior if suddenly we figured out a way to see life force. I mean, really see it, like night vision goggles. I truly believe the reason why we can't expand our view of energy is that the only thing that we have allowed ourselves to see is sort of an electromagnetic or electrosensor version of reality, right? Photosensors. So we see the spectrum of light. We have photosensors that we can, point at space and let it sit all night long, and we come up with this cloudy stuff that we call dark matter to fix the shitty theory of the Big Bang, right? We can measure, again, electrons, and we can watch atomic matter escape a collision inside of a collider. But what would life force be made out of? Maybe none of that stuff. And so how do you figure out how to make a sensor to see something that you don't understand? And what are the ramifications of having a giant portion of the universe sustained in consciousness out of something you can't observe, in its literal form? If I am truly alive and you're witnessing me through YouTube, or even hearing my voice, it's evidence of my consciousness, but it is not the direct observation of my consciousness, right? So let's see. We can sense consciousness. And what's funny is the greatest sensor of consciousness is consciousness, right? Let's just say we go back to the old theory of what life is, and we say a kitchen table is not alive. It may have been alive at one point if it's made of wood, but it's been severed from its food supply, and so it no longer has minerals and water, whatever it used to grow. And so we can look at that kitchen table, and we don't sense it. Part of it's because I think we have a bias that we think it's not alive in the first place. So it would be a heavy, heavy barrier to cross to simply say, you know what, honey? What, dear? I think the goddamn coffee table's alive, and your spouse looks at you like, don't make me divorce you. But you're pretty sure he or she is alive in that response. Could we trust our own vessel to be an instrument of science? We're not taught to do that, right? How far away is that star? Hell if I know. Pretty damn far it looks like to me, especially if it's what you think it is, which is a big ball of something in space. Hydrogen, helium, whatever. Eric Dollard talked about the fact that the Navy in their deep science laboratories has essentially come to the conclusion that light is instantaneous. It has no element of time. It simply is instant. And so that when light happens in space, none of those explosions that supposedly we're looking at in space are happening a long time ago and making it to us. They happened the second that we're looking at it. We're observing the now at all times. It's pretty interesting that they tell us that light has a velocity. We have cameras that shoot, 1 million frames a second? And they shine lights through Coke bottles, and they do all kinds of wild experiments. And you can, according to these cameras, they see the, beginning, middle, and end of the light traveling through the bottle. That's pretty convincing. That light has a velocity, at least through water. But the average human being, for us it's instantaneous because it goes so damn fast, and we can't get far enough away from light to have it take a long time to get to us, right? If it does have a speed, and the godfathers of electricity thought it had a speed, then I'm not sure exactly what they're talking about. Perhaps space is instantaneous. It's a longitudinal wave and not a transverse wave. And then once it hits atmosphere, it starts to slow down and bump into things. So perhaps within the bubble that we're in, light has a relative speed. Imagine that. If light travels in a vacuum, the true vacuum, it's instantaneous. The second it hits a medium of any kind, you measure the density of the medium, and that dictates the speed of light, which is why around the world the speed of light has always been different. It's close, but it's different. All the experiments of relativity, general relativity, with clocks, put them at the clock at the top of the Eiffel Tower, a clock at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, and it gets off a little bit. Well, perhaps that's simply the medium that the clock is using to measure time. I don't know. Maybe it's just strictly ethereal winds metabolizing the clock's movement. There's more towards the surface, less towards the top. Because ethereal winds is a little more dense at the bottom as it's banging around, creating dielectric waves. The one idea of vegetarianism that makes a lot of sense to me is the bearing of fruit. Some vegetarians, I think Steve Jobs was one of these guys, he said that I will only eat fruit that is bared from a plant. Because the theory is that once the apple falls off the tree, what does it do? It merely perishes. And even if it is the theory of the Egyptians, where souls are coming down to feast on the fruit, there would be no sin in you as a vessel consuming the same item. Right? All right, that's cool. I can get into that. If you don't pick a vegetable out of the ground, it just rots in the ground, right? So you plant carrots. When they mature, well, they're just going to die in the ground if you don't pick them up and eat them. Might as well go for it. But that's still a life cycle of birth and death and consumption, or perhaps the death due to the consumption. Same thing with the pig. It's just a lot cuter, and it anthropomorphizes into your form of life. And so you feel bad at one point. Now, I'm going to make it real clear. I do not support in any way, shape, or form these farms, these factories that make animals, that genetically modify animals so that they have no feathers and they have giant breasts, like these chickens that they modify. I don't know if any of that's true, but I wouldn't put it past them, right? These people that are cruel to the animals as they harvest them into forms of food. I by no means am into that, When you program computer software, for those of you who've never done it, and you've never taken even the splash course of how to do this, most of the software today is what we call object-oriented software. And you don't need to know anything about that except that we program software very much the way life occurs to us, right? When you go into your living room, your TV's an object, and you turn it on, and it uses its signal, its source to create a show. That show's a little object inside your TV, right? Okay. But the way we make programs run today is that we set up a bunch of logic and memory, a bunch of variables that contain values, and a bunch of instructions that need to be fired when certain things occur. Remember, when you turn on the light switch, it's a machine that is completing a circuit, and that turns on the light. It lets electrons flow to the light bulb, whatever it's made out of, and it creates light. You flick it off, the machine turns off. And it's a little object in the wall that's doing this, right? Well, in software, we write loops. There is one primary event loop in every piece of software you use today on your telephone, in your computer, in your TV, and it just sits there in loops, waiting for you to do something. Because it must ask the question, is the user doing something that I need to respond to? Are they turning the software on? Has there been a notification from the main server that your friend sent you a notice on Instagram? Oh, yep, there is. So let's grab that. Let's run the little piece of subroutines that knows how to go to that server, grab that message, put it on your phone, flip the icon with a little number in it, put the notice up on your phone, and then it goes back into the loop, waiting for the next thing to occur, which might be you realizing you have a notification. You heard the bell, and now you go in and get it. And it runs the subroutines to display that message to you. All right? What's the human nervous system? It's a loop. It's working hard all the time. Your autonomic system, well, it keeps your heart beating, keeps your blood pumping, keeps you alive. What if the most fundamental definition of life is any loop in reality that sits and waits for an action to occur and has subroutines that it fires as a result of that action taking place? Now, the old software, before we went to object-oriented software, in the software didn't necessarily have a loop, but the computer had a loop. The computer was sitting there waiting for you to give it a command that then it could tell the software, oh, they pressed the number 1 key. Do whatever you do when you hear a number 1 happen, and then it would execute. But the loop was just outside the software. There's been a lot of interesting science fiction stories about robots gaining sentient life, quote unquote, and society having to step in and give it the recognition of life, right? The fictional character Data in the Star Trek Next Generations was always dealing with this. They even had a court case as to whether or not the Starfleet could take Data back to Earth and dissect him to figure out how he's created so they could create more of him. And he fought for his own sovereignty and won. If robots keep going in the way that we have them going today, regardless of how remedial their logic might be, doesn't matter, we won't go into it, but regardless of what they do, we as human beings will probably get to a point where we start trying to write rules about what life is. And I'm going to tell you right now, in its most fundamental sense, it is anything that has a loop that waits for an action. Your applications and your telephones are program life forms, just like the movie Tron in 1982. There's some of us in computer engineering, when we saw Tron in 1982, I believe August, the sheer brilliance of what Steven Lisberger did when writing that film still shocks us to this day. Because when you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, approximately 12 years earlier, you had the HAL 9000 that ran the Odyssey spaceship, and it was so human. It was so in the future. Right? It's supposed to be 2001, which is kind of funny, that the adoption of whether or not that thing is alive or not was much easier, because the only thing it lacked was a vessel that looked like a human being. It was reading lips. That's pretty brilliant. Humans don't do that on average, right? For those of you who haven't seen Tron ever, which is a lot of you, a human being is pulled into a computer, and every program in that computer was a human being, but they called themselves programs. And they called human beings users, and they revered users as gods because they recognized that humans wrote them. And according to the programs, the users had a plan. It was a deterministic universe for them. Well, if you're a user, then all this has been according to a plan, was one of the lines spoken by the main character Tron. To which Jeff Bridges replied, "You wish," which was really confusing and probably demoralizing to Tron, because he's like, don't tell me this is all random, man, that I could just die because I just died. But that's the way Steven wrote it. By the way, I'm going to give you a little Paul Harvey on the credits for Tron. It should be told somewhere in history. There's a co-credit to the writing of Tron. I forget the lady's name. The way that she got her name on the script was the following. Steven wrote the script. A lot of people contributed to the thinking of various takes on the script, but Steven wrote the script. At one point, the studio was almost done making the movie, and they said, by the way, did you copyright the script? And he said, well, no, not really. You know, they steal your stuff. And they go, well, you got to get it copyrighted. So Steven's busy making the film. He's in post-production. He makes a phone call to his assistant, this woman, and says, hey, could you get the script off my desk and register it with the WGA, the Writers Guild of America? She grabbed the script, put her own fucking name on it as a co-writer, and registered the script. And therefore, for the rest of time, she gets a co-credit for writing Tron. She didn't write Tron, okay? So imagine society matures to the point I'm suggesting in this episode, where we start to recognize anything with a loop of logic, a loop that associates itself with logical commands of some sort, giving it form and definition. Life. Well, imagine all of the problems we had in the last 200 years granting rights to human beings of different colors. People had to fight to be recognized as human beings who are most definitely human beings. Interesting, right? So at some point, I mean, if you want to write a sci-fi script based on this, go right ahead. A good Black Mirror. It's been done, right? It's been done in Star Trek, like I said. But the notion is, we would have to, at some point, afford any definition of life, regardless of how meager that life might be, either no rights or rights, and then we'd have to figure out a science around it. The single-cell bacteria I opened the show with, well, it exists, but it unknowingly might kill mankind. We don't want to give deadly viruses rights because we have to protect our own existence. Okay. We have virus protection software on our computers, right? Well, if we were to say that the virus that's sitting around waiting in a loop, hiding out for the year 2000, hiding out for some eventuality, something you might trigger, its creator has created a monster that's going to race your hard drive, eat up all your processor power, and basically do harm. Well, if you run your virus protection software and it finds a macro inside a Word file that's been mailed to you by some spammer from China or Russia, it gets rid of it, doesn't it? It quarantines it and deletes its existence. Interesting. So we'd have to figure out a way to certify software life. Is it possible for this piece of software to do you harm by itself, even if you provoked it? Right? We have laws in the world at most places that are first world countries that you're not allowed to have exotic, dangerous animals on your property. I can't have a Bengal tiger in the backyard in Huntington Beach. I can't even have a ferret or a raccoon as a pet because it could carry rabies or it could kill me. The tiger could bite my neck. What is it, Siegfried and Roy, whatever his name was? One of them got bit in the neck and ran off. Luckily, the guy lived. But that's why you can't have those things. But we don't go and kill all the tigers in the world, because we recognize them as indigenous life beings that were here before man was here, or here just alongside man. So we have this interesting jurisdiction in our brains that we try not to be the beings that cause extinction events in animals' lives, right? People do forget that old fact that's basically that most of the extinction that has occurred on this planet has happened naturally. But for every life force that goes away, every distinction that goes away in the class, phylum, kingdom, era, or area of life, another one is reborn or created, right? A subspecies of something. So one ant goes away, another ant shows up. Our hubris of being able to control all this is really hysterical, right? So hopefully this has given you some food for thought. What is life? How would you know? If we can't sense consciousness in any form other than to observe it with our own biases, just like we can't see most of the light that exists in the universe with our human eyeballs, we have to use equipment to see it. Well, maybe we haven't found equipment to see all the other life. You know, I've heard conversations where people angst over the notion of, believing that your loved ones exist around you after death, which I believe is very much the case. I don't know how long they do it, but they can. But what if we turn this machine on and they're all over the place? That might be a little freaky, right? Who are these beings, right? That freaky footage that NASA supposedly shot of the shuttle doing an experiment where they put out a big wire to see how much ambient electricity they could create with probably, I don't know, 350 mile up Van Allen belt radiation. And the whole thing vaporized and separated, and they realized a lot of energy's up there, okay? But there's these, look like these flying discs all over the place. Interesting. They seem to swim around with logic and not like dust particles, changing directions. It's all that weird footage of these balls of light coming towards the Earth's atmosphere and bouncing off. What looked like lasers being shot from the surface of the Earth up, scaring these things away. I mean, it gets really weird very, very quickly. And the other notion that we must consider is that we see all that we need to see, all that we're really capable of comprehending. Perhaps the reason why we don't see things that are there is that we don't know how to comprehend it, that it might freak us out completely. Nobody wants to be freaked out. It's like the movie Ghostbusters when everything gets really hot and they're flying all over New York City. Okay, do you want to have that every single day? Driving down the street and you don't know if you're swerving away from a human or an apparition of a human. I think they get really disconcerting very quickly. Is the pilot in the plane, or is that a ghost of a pilot in the plane? Yeah. It kind of begs the question, are we playing with fire in some areas of philosophy and enlightenment? I guess we need to make some pretty enlightened human beings to stick their head in the, to look at the engine of the krill, as they said in Forbidden Planet. Get our mind blown and then come back to reality and go, okay. Yeah, it's probably pretty good that we're exactly the way we are. Those who take DMT, eventually they report back, yeah, I'm pretty happy to be human and I'm pretty happy to be right here, right now with you guys. Don't need to meet my alien host again. I'm done. 10 times was enough, or whatever the number might be. I think you feel me. This one just crept up on me because I feel like there's this mezzanine between what we are and what the universe might be, and it's very difficult to describe, right? I've struggled in this episode to put it together. I'd be interested in your comments, your impressions, your experiences in this whole realm. And by the way, for those of you who are big readers of fictional stuff, I don't get a lot of time to read fictional things. If you have books and things that kind of get into this, a lot of you do recommend stuff for me, and I go out and take a look to the best of my ability. Go ahead and put that in the comments too, because that's kind of cool. Come to the Facebook group and share a link, especially like a video link. It's much better when you share it in Facebook, even though Facebook is a bunch of, as we have heard in our recent Senate hearings, heavily censored and controlled and manipulated and sold off to everyone else. But it is unfortunately a good way to see the thumbnails of what you share. And so if you share a link in YouTube, I just get the link and no one actually sees the preview. You'd think that YouTube, who owns YouTube, would be able to create some sort of video preview in the frickin' comments section, right? I think they're trying to be careful about how many instances of videos players they install on one page, but something. They could do the thumbnail, which won't load anything until you say play. Thumbnail goes away, movie replaces it, boom, we can see what's going on right inside the section. But they don't do that. So again, Facebook is probably the best place to do it. But the place you find all the links is deepspace.com. Wow, deepthoughts.com. All the videos there, the audio's there, the log Facebook group, and the Patreon. I'm playing with some merch ideas for shirts that I personally would like to wear. I just want to explain it one time. There's a lot of great shirts that come out of a lot of great truth movements, but then they co-brand it with their brand. And some of you may dig that. I hate that shit. When for instance, Disney came out with the Tower of Terror, which was based on the Twilight Zone series. I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan. I would love to have just straight up Twilight Zone shirts, but the people who own the franchise haven't made any Twilight Zone shirts that I would ever wear. They're all over-branded, goofy, stupid pictures. They're not interesting, at least the ones I've seen. So I was so excited to go to the Tower of Terror and see if I could find myself a generic Twilight Zone shirt. But you can't. It's Twilight Zone with the ride on it. Twilight Zone with Disney on it. Instead of just, putting like the envelope that says Rod Serling on the front of the shirt. I think that'd be awesome. So I'm going to create some shirts that have Deep Thoughts brand on it. If you dig the show that much and you'd like to create a conversation with someone going, what the hell's that? Those shirts will be available, but they'll be quarantined into their own shirts. I'm going to make other shirts, at least right now. I dig shirts. I wear t-shirts and stuff on the show. But I want other shirts that just simply provoke thought, to simply say, I think. People look at your shirt and go, what the hell does that mean? Like, what do you think it means? I think. It's a new pastime. It's starting to catch on again, 2018. I suggest you look into it. It's really cool, stuff like that. So anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Late Night Deep Thoughts. Over now.